as we've said, trance is a highly focused state. There can be many ways that you get into trance. Some natural trances come from your emotional response to a situation. You can also choose what kind of state you're going to go into by understanding how your mind-body system works and what gets you into a trance, into a highly focused state. For some people who have ADHD or other diversities in the way they think, usually there is some hyper intense state of focus of some sort. So a person who may be not capable of focusing because the teacher says so or their parents say so, can sit down with a video game or sit down with cooking shows or sit down with a sport or an engine or something like that, and they just are very good at getting into that trance state for that hyper-focus state in that activity, but then not be good at doing other things where their interest isn't there and they're not fascinated. Because the best way to get into trance is through fascination. A fascination with a conversation, a fascination with a movie, a fascination with a ritual practice, a desire for connecting with other worlds and with spiritual connections can be a source of trance. We can use the chakras to think about natural ways of getting into trance and ways of choosing what trance you get into. So, but first we'll start with something that's important to the whole issue, and that is the idea of intuition. There are essentially two meanings of intuition. There is the psychologist and learning theory version of intuition, and there is the psychic or spiritual, mystical version of intuition. Intuition for the psychologist and the learning theory is basically being unconsciously skilled, where you've done something a lot over a period of time through conditioning and training. You have developed habits, skills and reactions which seem thoroughly natural to you because they come out of your sense of self and are neurological reflexes that you've basically trained into your thing. Like sports people who can do all kinds of amazing feats without seeming to think about it because it comes out of their reflexes. And they can be so quick because they have trained it so in neurological terms, so that the impulse for it or the reason for it goes into your spine and they're acting before the executive function has stepped into it. They train this for warriors so that they won't shoot the good guy or an innocent, but will only shoot a bad guy, as an example of training that they do for police and for soldiers and like. Now, the other meaning is in spirituality and mysticism is basically it's the feeling version of clairvoyance. Clairvoyance, because of the word, actually means clear seeing, and is generally in the last couple of hundred years applied to psychic seeing. And intuition is, if you like, psychic feeling, and you get this sense of what is predictable, an energy response that is a feeling rather than a clairvoyance. And then there's clairaudence, which is about hearing and hearing voices or hearing the sounds which give you psychic messages. Now, the reason I bring those up is because it's we're all subject to both of them. Some people train one. Everybody has the first one. We all have things that we've done that feel natural. And part of the challenge in spiritual growth, personal development, and therapy is to be able to recognize that these habits that have been embedded into our system, into our reflexes that feel natural, aren't always good for you. An example comes from movement with Alexander technique, where you can be moving in a particular way for most of your life because of the models that you got from your parents when you were a kid and learning to walk, and you want to be like dad, you want to be like mum, and one of the ways that that expresses itself is to move the way they do and take on their movement habits. What Alexander technique tries to trains people to do, doesn't try to, trains people to do, is to become aware of the habits of movement that you have in everyday life, and then learn to hold space so that you can breathe and then move in a new and creative way that is more mechanically natural for the body and is more relaxed and efficient. And so you can use your body as it is in the best way possible. Now, this has a metaphorical use in that you have, and now in the emotional and psychological level, we have a whole lot of reflexes that come out of our conditioning from childhood on into the adulthood, and we have default emotions. Like a default emotion is what you feel when nothing is going on. I've mentioned this before in other videos. If nothing is going on, you may feel anxious, which is basically a fear response. You may feel, when nothing is going on, you may feel shame and rage, which can be either expressed as depression because the shame overpowers the rage and you don't feel the power to do something about your situation, and so you take all of your power and you inwardly direct it in a self-destructive way. In the case of rage, you can have a default response that when nothing is going on, you get into road rage, or you feel trapped and your immediate response is to hit out. And there can be, associated with those is different emotions that will cause you to go into a trance and there's two types of trance, because we're talking about tantra and trance, and tantra is about duality and about a spectrum rather than something where they're just opposites to each other. The warrior's approach to duality is either or. You are either with the light or you're with the dark. You are either have this as true or it's false. It's evil or good. Whereas the lover's approach is more complex and subtle and saying, well, the sunset is when light and dark meet. And there are experiences you can have where light and dark are interacting and connected. Something that can be dark in one time and place can be light in another time and place. For example, something can appear to be good and have evil consequences. Something can appear to be evil and have good consequences. The absolutes kind of break down. So we can go through these sorts of things, and one of the way to try and understand it is that you have primal responses to a situation which may come out of those intuitive responses. The expectation, the training, the conditioning of your life suggests that this is the natural way to respond. Naturally, you should be afraid here. Naturally, you should be angry here. Naturally, you should feel desire in this format. Naturally, you should be feeling hedonistic and just go mad at the banquet because there's such good food around. Naturally, you should take action here. Naturally, and these are conditioned responses. And part of the issue is being able to go, okay, what you feel natural may not be the best option for you. And then we have the warrior's approach, which is let's get rid of that conditioning. I've got to actually be pure. I've got to get rid of all of that conditioning from my parents, the false, fake conditioning that came out of my childhood with their bad examples, and society is shit and it's conditioned me this and that way, and I need to be pure, get back to the original face, as they talk about in Zen, the face before you knew who you were. And in the case of, say, yoga, where you go off to the forest and you go walk around naked, covered in ashes, and you seek the purity that comes from meditation, non-stop meditation and non-stop yoga, and you find an enlightenment which is about a pure mind, and even have these traditions in Buddhism of the pure heaven approach. Whereas the lover's approach is let's embrace those emotions and then pause, breathe. This is what is there for delayed gratification that we use in Tantra. You hold back on the pleasure and it intensifies. By being able to breathe through it and into it, you're able to turn what is an ordinary orgasm into a mind-blowing explosion of spiritual experience, of hallucination and all kinds of wild experiences that can come from understanding how delayed gratification works. And there's a difference between attachment and detachment, rather, and dissociation. Some of the teachings that we see about detachment involve not being emotional, not being disconnected from all of the from what the responses will be to your actions, and disconnected from the body, because the body is the source of the senses, is the source of emotions, and that's the source of the impurities that are going to cause you so many problems. Whereas the lover's approach is embrace the senses, embrace the body, and breathe. And through that, you can, instead of just being a hedonist, you can become a connoisseur who appreciates the subtleties of the hedonism. You can participate in that hedonism, but you get to know what's the history, what's the little subtle sensations of each food at the banquet, and not just eat crazily. You roll it around in your mouth and you take that pause to actually enjoy it. And the same with, say, the warrior's approach to fear is that it must be controlled. And they have, some people will come up with this idea that courage is the absence of fear. And the lover's approach is, I am afraid, I acknowledge that fear, and then it takes courage to first acknowledge the fear and then breathe and go, okay, what is the best response here? Sometimes that means running. If you don't know how to handle snakes and you find yourself confronted by a snake, you run. If you've learned how to handle snakes and you have a reflex to challenge yourself, maybe, you might have seen people handle snakes and you think, I will give it a try. No right way to do it. One might get you bitten by a snake if you don't know what you're doing. Desire is the same. The desire, you get sexuality and desire are also very intense and can cause you to lose integrity, which is the counterbalance for desire. You have a primal response of desire, and then you have a chosen response of integrity. And the chosen response, also with fear, integrity and fear work together as well, because courage is about maintaining your integrity in the face of fear. And so it is with desire, that you desire something, and so many people will reshape themselves in order to fit the desired object or person that they're looking for. And whereas you can make a choice, I want to be rich, I want to have a big house and a big car and fly little planes and have all of this, and you can rip you can do this by just getting a job and working flat out to get what you want and riding over anyone along the way and having no values and no sense of integrity or ethics in the process. On the other hand, if you can actually maintain your integrity, get a job that you love, and build the money by getting the workers that you work with, giving them a share of the profits, and so that they work harder for you anyway, because they'll certainly work harder for you if you reward them. And you build up the wealth in an ethical and way that maintains your integrity and your sense of the values that you wanted. An example of this failing is once upon a time Google had as its saying, "Do no evil." And once the lawyers and the management specialists got in there, they thought, oh, we don't need to do that. Why would you do that? And they go on, and you end up with them running all over the place. Are they doing evil? Well, that's up to debate. Now the other, let's go through this and simplify it or give it a bit of structure. So you can go, these intuitive responses that are the primal response to a situation can be thought about in terms of the chakras. A primal response would be fear, first chakra. Second chakra, desire. Third chakra, sensuality and hedonism as a primal response. Fourth chakra is emotional or passionately taking action without consideration of consequence. Fifth chakra is language. You can get lost in the sweet language that people speak and get into just follow the person who is has the rhetoric and says the things you want to hear, and you go into a beautiful trance, which is what happens, say, with politics, where you get suckered by the language and you get highly connected with it. And then the third one is you can get lost. The sixth chakra. That was the fifth. Language is the fifth chakra. Sixth chakra is ideas and imagination. People can get lost in the ideas and imagination in their own response. Their inner life gets more important than connecting with the outer life, and you see this with both yogis and the Christian traditions and Hindu traditions, even some Buddhist traditions, where the object is to get away from the senses and to control the body in order to be able to say that the spiritual life is most important over anything else. And the seventh chakra, in that primal, most fundamental response, is like cognitive dissonance, when you are faced with the unexpected and the big world out there, and suddenly you get lost in a response, in all kinds of responses, which can include rage, or it can include going into trance, one of the other trances, because with cognitive dissonance is when your expectations aren't met by are met by reality, and that reality does not live up to your expectations. That's what cognitive dissonance is. And so the way that you can cope with cognitive dissonance is to be afraid, or to go into something desirable, or to head into the senses, to act without thinking, or someone with good language and great ideas is charismatic, follow them, because then you don't have to deal with the fact that you feel confused and lost because the world doesn't operate the way you think it should operate. Now, with these primal things, those are reflexes that have been brought up. When you take a breath and can hold space and with yourself and with your partners, when someone else's response brings you, confronts you, then each of the chakras has their own way of coping with those primal responses. This is the yang to the yin, or the yin to the yang, depending on how you want to frame it. So first chakra is fear, and of course courage is the answer. Second chakra is desire. That primal response of desire comes integrity, where you maintain your sense of self in the face of your dreams and desires coming true. Third chakra, sensuality, hedonist sensuality. The response, the choice is the connoisseur, to allow that sensuality to become an expert in it, to understand how it works so that you can enjoy it. With passionate emotional responses without consideration of the consequences, presence and mindfulness becomes the answer, the chosen response, where you allow yourself to have the experience, pause for a moment, and consider what are the consequences, which leads into language and the way that rationality, listening and thinking about the language and thinking what's going underneath the language so that you can understand its deeper meanings and what the consequences are for you and onwards. Ideas and imagination, when people get lost into it, meditation and mindfulness, the two of them are perfect responses, and there's a similarity there, an interaction between these each of these different feelings and trances are interactive and interconnected. So meditation is when you use and develop that imagination and those ideas and build up rationality and mindfulness, and they all work together. And of course, cognitive dissonance is about open-mindedness and higher powers, and recognizing that when you feel confused and the world doesn't operate the way you expect it to or should, then one is to be open-minded and to use the other ones that I've mentioned: courage, integrity, connoisseurship of enjoyment, mindfulness, rationality, and meditation, so that you can recognize the higher powers that are involved in you not understanding what's going on, or you having to cope with feeling lost and confused. And that's the moment when the higher power can step in to help you, or you can, and that higher power, how can we talk about it? Higher powers can be spiritual in the sense of gods and goddesses. It can also, or a single god if that's your thing, but it can also be about statistical reality, that you recognize, for instance, that in the majority of cases you'll do all right if you're in that, by recognizing the reality of where you are. If you're in a privileged society like the West, you've got the higher power can be just that you've got a pretty good life, and recognize that even though it's not going the way you'd hoped it goes, there are always some backups. If you have the bad luck to have been born in places where it's extreme poverty, and you may need to think of the higher power as being something that you pray to and that you can use to practically analyze what's happening around you and find the ways to make the best out of each moment. So all of these involve different sorts of trances. The trance is the highly focused response, and when fear happens, you've got a choice. You can have a choice of going into the trance that the fear inspires, or you can breathe and take a moment and then choose the trance needed to align all your capacities behind a courageous act. Desire and hedonism together can give you a highly focused state of sensuality, of enjoyment, of feeling bliss, and then using breathing for a moment and taking a pause and going, okay, how can I fulfill this desire whilst maintaining my integrity as my values, my sense of self? And connoisseurship is like that too, because you're going, okay, I'm feeling a great deal of pleasure and sensuality. How can I deepen this pleasure and sensuality, this hedonism, and maintain my sense of values so that I participate in that sensuality in a way that is healthy and supportive of my body and of my mind, and that I can and maintain my integrity as I fulfill that sensual experience. Taking action is also mindfulness and presence. Well, it takes mindfulness to be courageous, takes a moment to breathe and look at the reality that you're facing and go forward. When you're going, and then take action. So this is how these are all interactive, because you need to use rationality with your courage. You need to use mindfulness with your courage. You need to be sensually alive with your courage. You need to be sensually alive in order to enjoy the desire, take those first steps to fulfilling a desire with integrity, rather than fulfilling the desire by simply any means available. And same happens, meditation, recognizing that how your imagination and ideas can help you, and using your language and rationality in order to be able to fulfill our desire by working with people, so that you can inspire them using language and rationality and using your imagination. Open-mindedness allows you to be responsive, which is the seventh, responsive to reality and to understanding what's the truth about the situation. So we've gone all over the place. Let's summarize now. Trance is a highly focused state. It can be inspired by fear or courage, and courage together. It can be inspired by desire and integrity. It can be encouraged by sensuality, hedonism, and connoisseurship. Deeply intense trances can come from emotionally passionate actions and doing them mindfully. You can do them thoughtlessly, you can do them mindfully. Language can inspire trances, which is what we do with hypnosis and guided visualizations, and teaching meditation. But it's also important to understand what underlies the power of language, which is rationality and imagination. The sixth one is ideas and imagination. You can get lost into them without understanding how they affect your life, because you let go of the other possibilities: courage, integrity, connoisseurship, presence, and mindfulness and rationality, and get so involved in the ideas that are there in the language that you get lost in them. Meditation helps you to develop your imagination and your ideas and your focus, and then when you marry it with the other ones, it becomes a source of power in changing yourself and the world. And of course, cognitive dissonance means that you get lost in confusion, and you can have a trance that is about, I don't know who I am, and anxiety can arise, depression can arise, because you get lost in the fact that the world is not the way you think it should be. And you can get lost into cynicism, where you don't actually see what's going on around you because the world isn't as you expect it to be. So open-mindedness and recognizing reality through courage, integrity, connoisseurship, presence of mind in mindfulness, rationality, and meditation, where you examine and understand the way things work, and by understanding the nature of higher power, which can be both a materialist version and a spiritual version.